Thank you, Rabbi. That's a wonderful introduction. Sounds completely different when you're saying it. It is a great pleasure to be here. Ottawa is the second place. When I began my book, this was the second location. That's because in Montreal, after doing the first two interviews on the book, somebody then broke into our car and stole everything we had. So then we fled to Ottawa, and we're able to pull off one interview the next day. It was a rocky beginning to a long subject. Now I'm going to just briefly, I'll try to keep this kind of brief, but it's hard for me to slow down, and it's hard for me not to talk for a while because I'm very excited about this book. It just came out. It's August 12th. It took me years to write. Now, it took me 7 years. I mean, I say 2 of those years I was making a snack in the kitchen, but nonetheless, this was a lot of work, and there were a lot of people interviewed for this book. But the book also has a lot of photographs. They're just in black and white. Here you get to see them in color, so you're getting a good deal for your money. And I want to go through a few of those photographs because I think sometimes photographs are very revealing. This one, we don't know exactly what it is. This is about 1995. It's an execution ground. We don't know it's Fujian, maybe Xinjiang. It looks a little. It looks like it has too many leaves for Xinjiang. But we can see it's a very classic pose that these men are striking, and they're all putting sort of barrier signals between to the camera. And the one in the middle is, he has a very stern expression. It's sort of, I'm an authority here, I'm official. The one next to him is saying, hey, it's a big party, relax. And this man in the foreground is quite defiant. And the reason he's defiant is because he's wearing a white rag, what you see on his arm there. And that's to prevent backsplatter because he's just fired a gun into the bodies which are down here at the bottom. Now, that's all pretty shocking in a way, but in another way it's not. I mean, this is an official execution. There's a reason why this photograph was made. These people had committed, by Chinese state standards, real crimes. We have one other photograph from this same scene, and there are clearly big character accusations or sort of recitation of the terrible crimes these people committed. And so we could say that actually this photo doesn't tell us, in some ways, doesn't tell us very much. It just tells us China's a standard authoritarian state. I mean, you could change the races of those people. You could change the uniforms slightly, just blur them. And you have a picture that could have been taken anywhere for the last century of an authoritarian execution ground, authoritarian state. Now, that is going to change from 1995 to 2014 These are the new executioners in China. These are the ones who are actually, the majority of executions are being done by surgeons now. These men, the reason why we have this photograph is actually to promote the idea of giving up your organs, to presenting, to donating your organs. And in fact, these ones are probably legal organs. They're done by somebody who actually volunteered. But inside there are kidneys and liver, and maybe lungs and a heart. We don't exactly know. But the key difference here is that in fact, the majority of these organs that are carried in these boxes in China are no longer from regular prisoners. That is, they're no longer from convicts, people who were, sentenced to death in Chinese law. They are from political and religious prisoners, prisoners of conscience. And we'll go into the identity of those now. Now, to build what happened over the last 20 years there was a vast apparatus built around this. Again, we think of China as, we have compassion fatigue about China. We assume that there's tremendous amount of, terrible human rights wrongdoings and so forth. We sort of think we've seen it all. And we know that there are many prison camps and so forth. But I think this does add something, because we're also looking at some hospitals here. And we're looking, even in one case, we're looking at the Zhenjiang City Cremation Center. Now these are all important locations. But in fact, this is not a comprehensive list. This is just a list in my book. This is just relevant sites and locations that are in my book. World Organization to Investigate the Persecution of Falun Gong recently put out an indictment of about, I think, well over 50 hospitals in China, which I couldn't fit those on the map. There was no point in doing that. I wanted to just fit the things that I refer to in the book. But you see, this is a very geographically dispersed setup. And let's start over in the northwest corner, near that, underneath that relevant sites and locations. Let's sort of zoom in on that. You've got the Urumqi Air Force Hospital, the Urumqi Central Railway Hospital, and the Western Mountain Execution Grounds. Now, that transformation of 20 years begins here in Xinjiang, which was traditionally the party's laboratory for testing of various kinds, including nuclear weapons testing. So in the 60s, this is where the nuclear weapons were tested. It led to massive birth defects in Urumqi and among the Uyghur or Muslim population out there. It also led to the first experiments on live organ harvesting. This, as far as we can tell, began in 1994, based on another witness. But in 1995, we can say for certain it happened because this man performed a live organ harvest in Western Mountain Execution Grounds. Especially, he was on the political side, and he was told by his superior to take a surgical team, go out. A lot of people are lying on the ground, just been shot. One of them in particular, they say, put him on the gurney, put him inside the van, take out his kidney and his liver. And he was alive. The man was, in fact, the heart was beating. Dr. Enver-Totti is very clear about that, because when he made the first cut, the body lurched. Now, mainly this gunshot onto this side of the chest, it acted as a kind of anesthesia, a kind of crude anesthesia. It just sent the body into extreme shock, and the body tended not to lurch much after that. But the blood continued to pulse, because the heart was still beating the entire time. Now, this is a medical advance, because if you take a living organ out of a living human being, transplant it into somebody else, it's far less likely that the new host will reject the organ. The second advance is represented in 2004 by this man. This is Dr. Ko Wen-Jiang. He is the head of surgery at National Taiwan University. He is also currently running for mayor of Taipei. I believe he's 12 points in the lead at this moment. The reason he's in the lead is because he's considered to be a man of great integrity, a man who says whatever is true. In 2004, he was, as the head of surgery, looking out for a lot of elderly patients in Taiwan. And these elderly patients had needed new kidneys and livers, so he went to the mainland to negotiate a lower price on these. He figured his patients really couldn't afford $60,000 for a new kidney. He wanted to pay the Chinese price, about half of that. So he met with the doctors, and they went out to drinking, and they had a big banquet, and so forth. And the next day they called him in and said, okay, look, you're not a foreigner, you're a brother, and we're giving you the Chinese price. But we're going to do better than that. We know that you're very concerned about the quality of these organs. You mentioned that you're worried because they're coming from prisoners, therefore they'll have hepatitis, they'll be from drug addicts, people who've lived really grim lives. You don't want your patients to get those. So we want to guarantee you that you are getting nothing but the best. You are getting all Falun Gong. These people, they don't drink, they don't smoke, they practice very healthy Qigong, and we expect your discretion. And in fact, he was discreet, and this is the first time he's allowed his name to be used, and he's no longer an anonymous figure. So we can say that something very significant happened. And in fact, if we go back to him, it is only 2 years later that the first political prisoners are harvested in Xinjiang, okay? And they are harvested on behalf of high-ranking Chinese communist officials. So in other words, we're looking at an exception 5, 6 high-ranking Communist Party officials arrive. They say, we need new kidneys. You go into the political wing of the prison, you take blood samples. Eventually, a couple of people are carved up and the officials leave, some others take their place. Now, really, we're looking at something that's kind of an exception. Now, these are people, it is true that these political prisoners could not be sentenced to death under Chinese law. They hadn't committed those kinds of crimes. But when we get to this point, we've really reached that. Because no Falun Gong has been sentenced to death. Because none of them have committed violent crimes. There's absolutely no case of it. So it is impossible, even under the vagaries of Chinese law, to commit these people. Now, this is where, and that brings up a question. Why did this happen? How did this thing accelerate? How did it get so out of control? And that question is 6 out of 10 chapters in my book. And I can't really summarize it, but I'll do a very quick job here and just say this is the heartland of where Falun Gong started, but it spread very quickly. And it spread not only through the cities, but also into the countryside, to the point where you had, and this is sort of the standard explanation of why there was an attack on Falun Gong from the government, was that it became 70 million people. This was 5 million more, maybe even more than that, 5 million more than the Chinese Communist Party itself. And certainly size plays something to do with it, but I also think that boy in the foreground dressed in the PLA uniform has even more to do with it, because actual PLA were doing this exercise and were committed Falun Gong practitioners. That is, they believed in truthfulness, compassion, forbearance. And this is what distinguished Falun Gong from other Qigong movements at the time, was this emphasis on morality and applying morality. But the thing that the Chinese Communist Party really feared was, I believe, this woman. This is Ding Jing. She's in a hospital in Toronto right now. I think she's okay, I'm not sure. But she was a coordinator. She's somebody who was allowed to teach the Falun Gong exercises to other people. And so she also carried around a boombox, and she carried around a black garbage bag to pick up trash. And she looked over 3 practice sites in western Beijing, in the park. And those 3 practice sites were, one was for China Central Television and the Xinhua News Agency. Now, that is pretty much the whole propaganda arm of the Chinese